So after I came out to family and friends, what I found increasingly was when I would share this story with a client or a prospect or a colleague, the comment would be, that's pretty inspiring. And I realized that I could perhaps, if I shared more of the story, that others who are facing difficult journeys, difficult decisions that are hard to make, or facing some fears, or are lacking confidence, or not willing to be vulnerable, I can potentially say, share with them the huge journey that I had been on. So I could use my story as inspiration to help them through whatever challenges they might be facing. So I told the story. I wrote it up and I told the story.
So, how's your relationship with your wife today?
We remain friends. We speak a couple times a week. I see her once a week. Often around transporting my daughter, but we're both in a better place now. And look, the journey was as hard for her as it is for me. I don't want to minimize that fact that, by me making this choice and me having hid such a large part of myself from, the woman who was my wife and best friend, created a lot of pain and a lot of difficulty for her. But she's now in a better place. She's happier and I'm happier than where we were before this happened.
Are you saying that you're the happiest now than you've ever been?
I am, and I remember in a therapy session a couple of years ago, I was struggling with a romantic relationship. Because look, dating at 60, right, is completely different than 40 years ago. And I was not only 20, but dating was completely different back then. And dating men instead of women. And so there was a lot of newness for me. And in some ways felt like a teenager because I had no idea what I was doing. I felt like I was making a lot of mistakes, newbie mistakes, perhaps. But I was learning. I was learning what worked for me and what didn't work for me. And I think that one of the lessons for me was, if you don't know what you want, at least go figure out what you don't want. And that's progress. But I was struggling with a particular relationship. What I realized at the time was I didn't know, I wasn't sure if I knew what happiness was. I had spent so many decades building up these walls around my emotion that not only could I not feel those emotions, but once I started to feel them as I broke down those walls, I probably didn't know how to regulate them. And so there was a lot of getting good with emotion. So I wondered if I even knew what happiness looked like or felt like. And it took me a while to appreciate what happiness was, to be able to recognize and embrace the emotions that I was feeling, when something wasn't working, to understand how I might be hurting or feeling sad, or when things were going well, to understand what exhilaration truly was and what happiness that led to. And so I've grown a lot since, and know now that I can recognize those emotions, and know for a fact that I'm happier than I have ever been. Um, in part because now I think I know what happiness feels like. I think I know what happiness looks like, and I could have never happened when I was inauthentic, not vulnerable, and hiding my emotions.
One of the things that I always ask my podcast guests, Mike, share some of the lessons of your story and a thought or two how your story would help these people.
Yeah, the importance of facing our fears, that our fears are these emotions that are not going to come true. And so just acknowledge them for what they are and don't let them stop you. The second is the strategy of really the one step at a time. It's easier to minimize those fears if we're just thinking about that little step. If we focus on a bunch of tiny steps, each step takes us forward, and we're not hindered, and we're not obsessed over the fears of the audacity of the goal that we might be trying to achieve. So one step at a time. And the final thing is, I couldn't have done this without support. I needed that therapist. I needed that peer group. And no matter what each of us is struggling with, we need to seek out that support. It's there. it's even there for free. I mean, Gamma doesn't charge anything. There are organizations where I could have approached for free counseling for people who are trying to, in our case, LGBTQ and coming out, but don't do it alone. Don't do it alone.
I didn't have a community when I was disfellowshipped from the church because I lost all my family and friends except my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes a community doesn't necessarily come to us. We have to go out and find a community. I'm a part of Front Runners and Front Walkers International, great organization. Gamma's a great one too. Mike, it's been such a pleasure having you on my program today. I know many of my podcast listeners will gain some good insight if they're struggling with whatever fear it is in their life, to be able to come out as their authentic self. So I thank you very much for this podcast. It was such a pleasure spending time with you.
Likewise, thank you for the opportunity, Dan, to share some of my story.
Okay, thank you so much.